You know his name, even if you've never met him. Chad, the archetype, the ideal. He is the standard every man is taught silently or loudly to compete with. He's tall, he's strong, he's charming. Um, he he doesn't try hard because he doesn't have to, and and he's wanted. He's seen and he's chosen. And if you're not him, you're invisible. At least that's the story that goes around. This episode is about that story though. And it's about the quiet destruction that it leaves in its wake. Because when you believe the lie that only Chads get chosen, well then you start shrinking your sense of worth down to a formula that you'll never fit. And in doing so you lose the very thing that actually makes you magnetic. And that's your integrity, your depth, your emotional safety. So let's break that cycle today. And let's maybe start with the obvious. There are men who seem to attract attention effortlessly. They walk into a room and heads turn, right? They post a photo and the likes just roll in. They speak and people lean in. And if you've been someone who felt overlooked like your whole life, this hits a wound that's fairly deep. And it makes you wonder, what am I doing wrong? Or what do they have that I don't have, right? Or will anyone ever want me the way I am? And so you start measuring everything through this comparison of sorts. You look at maybe height, you look at symmetry, right? You consider confidence and social status. You look at the vibes and the lack of swag that you have. And it starts feeling like a competition where you're always in the last place. But here's where the incel myth takes deep hold. It says that because you're not Chad, you are inherently unlovable. And that women are biologically hardwired to only want the top 10%, right? And that connection or affection and sex, these are only reserved for the few. And the rest of us are just background noise. But here's where that myth misses. What it deliberately hides is this. Being wanted is not the same as being loved. Chads might get the DMs, they might get the first hook and first look, but attention is not affection though, and validation is not the same thing as intimacy. Chemistry is not connection, and while some men are chasing eyeballs per se, what most people I think are actually starving for is someone who actually makes them feel safe. So let's redefine what being chosen really means, because if being chosen just means that you're getting noticed, then yes, Chad wins, right? But if being chosen means being seen in your wholeness, for example, or being emotionally safe to open up to, or being trustworthy, especially in your presence, then being someone who can sit with another's fears without flinching is something really to strive for. You might be more powerful in this space than you've been told, because those aren't traits that you were born with. They're not they're not locked into your DNA. No, these are attributes that are cultivated, and they grow from a commitment to honesty and living with integrity, from a choice to stay grounded in who you are, even when the world says it isn't shiny enough or not attractive enough. But let's be honest, if you have believed the Chad myth long enough, well, you probably feel this mix of resentment and grief, right? Resentment that you've been told to compete in a game that was never fair. Grief that you've been passed over again and again. And that's not because you weren't good. but it's more so because someone else fit the mold better. And that grief is very real. It's valid. But it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It does mean that you've been hurt by a system that teaches men that performance is more important than being present, that size matters far more than safety, and that dominance dominance is more valuable than gentleness. And none of that is true. I want to unpack a little bit more though about how the Chad archetype it distorts one's identity and how it leads to self-hatred and performance-based intimacy, and how choosing to lead with depth over dominance isn't just possible, but this is actually transformative, because you don't need to be a Chad to be chosen. You just need to become you, the you that's fully honest without any apology. But let's go deeper into what this Chad myth actually does to us, shall we? It doesn't just make us insecure. It basically rewrites the definition of what masculinity is. And suddenly a man isn't being about one with integrity. It's more about impact, right? It's about how much attention can you attract. How many people desire you is the new metric. And how effortlessly can you dominate a room? It trains you in essence to become desirable instead of becoming yourself. And in chasing that desirability, you lose the very parts of you that make you a safe and beautiful place to land. So the Chad myth would say something like, don't show uncertainty, or don't reveal tenderness, or don't express your loneliness. Just win and dominate and impress, right? And the tragedy is this. The tragedy is that you might even succeed in all those things. You might bulk up. You might develop some sense of swagger. You might even mimic charisma. And you might become good at getting attention. But underneath all this though, you feel hollow, because none of it was built on you. All this was built on the mask that you thought you had to wear to be chosen. So let's call this what it is. This is performance-based masculinity, and it's a trap, and it's exhausting. It basically says, if I'm not on, I'll be abandoned, and if I don't keep winning, I'm going to be invisible. If I don't look the part, I'll never be seen for who I am. But the real paradox is this: the more you perform, the less people will connect with the real version of you. And this is the one who wants to be known and not just noticed. This is the part of you that craves depth and not just someone else's desire. The one who aches for connection that actually lasts. And here's the truth I'd like you to hear. You will never feel chosen in this space if the version of you that gets chosen isn't actually the real you. So how do you break out of this? Well, it starts with this. It starts with reclaiming your definition of what value is. Not through external metrics, but through this internal congruence. So you can ask maybe, am I aligned with who I truly am? Am I leading with honesty, even when it costs me status, for example? Am I showing up in ways that I'm proud of, or even if no one notices? Because when you start showing up from that place, it's then that you stop begging for external validation. And it's here that you stop comparing yourself to Chad, and you stop playing a game that you were never meant to win. But instead you'll build a life that's quiet and steady, where you get to be whole. And the people who are meant to walk with you, they'll recognize you. They'll identify and say, you're my person. Not because you impressed them, but it's because they felt safe enough to stay around you. So let's not pretend that this is easy though, shall we? Choosing presence over performance, it feels terrifying at first, especially if you spent years watching yourself being passed over, especially if the world has given you evidence that attention is going to go to someone else. But let me offer this. Attention is loud, and intimacy is quiet. You might not get the most DMs. You might not turn heads at the bar. But when someone does choose you, they'll be choosing something that is real and tangible, not this persona that you've crafted, and not this projection, right? They're not choosing a polished brand, but they're choosing a man who has done the work, a man who chooses to be steady, a man who chooses to be kind and to be available. Let me now explore a little bit about how to cultivate this emotional availability and what it looks like to embody intimacy without shame, and why the most attractive men aren't those with the sharpest jawlines, but the ones with the clearest hearts. Because the world doesn't need more Chads. What the world needs are more men who are safe to be loved by. So let's talk about what actually makes someone magnetic. Not just attractive, but irresistibly safe to connect with. And it's not looks. It's not status. It's not charm. I mean, those might spark attention, but they don't sustain intimacy. You see, what sustains intimacy is something far rarer, and that's emotional availability. And before your mind goes to, that's just therapy speaking, let's define what that really means, shall we? Emotional availability is this ability to be present, not just performative. Like, to be able to hold space for your own pain and, in time, others. To hear a no without shutting down. To be able to express a need without shame. To show care without needing to be validated for it. And this is not softness. This is strength. This is leadership. And this is what safety looks like. And safety is what makes people want to stay. So the myth would say you have to chase her attention, but the real truth is she's looking for someone who feels safe to attach to. And safety does not mean boring. It does not mean weakness. What it does mean is someone who is anchored, someone who doesn't flinch at emotion, someone who isn't performing like their masculinity just to win approval, someone who can say, this is how I feel, or this is what I want, or this is what I can hold. They can say, this is what I'm unable to do for you, without turning it into this game of manipulation. And that's rare. Like, that's powerful. That is unforgettable. So how do you build emotional availability? It starts off by slowing down. Not every moment needs to be optimized for an outcome, right? Not every conversation needs to be secured and scored for flirtation. Not every silence needs to be filled. Instead, practice being present. Practice being curious and being honest. Being open to wherever that moment takes you both collectively. This is where connection begins. When you stop trying to direct everything and instead you start simply by being in it. Next, build self-trust, because emotional availability doesn't mean you never get triggered, but it does mean that when you do, you talk about it. It means that you can actually notice when jealousy creeps up, or when your insecurity is on the horizon. You fear of not being enough and collapsing or compensating. isn't there anymore because you're able to stay rooted. And you're able to breathe and ground yourself. And you own your own side of the fence, and you name it gently. And this makes you safe, not just for others, but also for yourself. Because in this process, you stop spiraling, you stop ghosting, you stop needing to control everything, you know? Because you finally trust your own capacity to feel and to stay. And finally, I would say let go of the idea that love is this reward for becoming someone else. That's the lie. That's the trap most fall into it. It says things like, if I just get ripped enough, right? Or if I can just get my income high enough, if I can just fix my voice, my jaw, my vibe. But you don't need to be better to be lovable. What you need to be is you need to be honest. If you're working on yourself, let that be because you actually love yourself, not because you hate who you are. Because people, they can feel the difference. The one pushes them away, whereas the other invites them in. So the real question isn't, how can I be more like Chad? The real question is, am I becoming the kind of man that I would feel safe loving? I mean, would you trust you if you weren't you? Would you open up to the version of you? Would you feel seen and understood in your own presence? See, those are the questions that actually matter. Those are the questions that change lives. I want to close here by looking at what it means to live in that zone of being loved, even when no one is on your arm yet, and how to carry intimacy as an inner reality of your experience, not just an external reward that you're aiming for. Because, again, you don't need to be Chad. What you need to be is whole. So, let me bring this full circle. You've been told over and over again that the only kind of man that gets chosen is the one who's attractive. And if you're not Chad, you're going to be overlooked. That attraction is genetic, and that connection is rigged, and the love is only for the lucky few. But you've also started to see through that. You've started to feel the lie in the midst of that idea. To name the ache that it's created inside of you. And now it's time to reclaim your story for you. Because you weren't meant to live in the shadow of someone else's ideal or expectation. You were meant to shapeshift into your own version of you, not a cardboard cutout of what the world wants. You weren't meant to shrink or fade or be fake or perform your way into being chosen. You were meant to be met in the midst of your depth, in the midst of your complexity. You were meant to be met in the midst of your presence. And the people who are meant for you, they aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for something that is real. So what does it look like to live as someone who already knows that they're enough? It looks like walking into the room with your shoulders relaxed. Not because you know that you'll be the most noticed, but because you're not trying to be in the first place. It looks like speaking from your heart without waiting to see if it lands. It looks like holding space for rejection without having to crumble in the midst of that. It looks like choosing kindness without needing it to be reciprocated. And most of all, this looks like being consistent with who you are, even when no one is watching. That's how you become unshakable. That is how you become magnetic. That is how you become trustworthy. And let me say this plainly. You are not too plain. You are not too quiet. You're not too slow. You're not too emotional. And you're not too unsure. You are exactly the kind of someone that is hoping to be felt in safety. And this will happen if you keep trying to become who were meant to be. Others may not recognize you if you've buried your essence beneath layers of performance and you move into this transition. See, the only true way to be chosen is to let your true self be known, and not just a version of you, like the you that is unfiltered. And that means that you might have to grieve the years that you spent pretending. You might have to grieve those moments that you let someone overlook you and assume that you deserved it. To grieve the energy that you wasted trying to win the affection and approval of others instead of building true intimacy. So make that time, grieve in that space, feel it, name the cost, spend time in this area, and then forgive yourself because you were just trying to survive with what you had available. You were trying to belong. You were trying to matter in a world that made you question your place in it. But survival is not the end goal. Connection is. And that begins now. So let me leave you with this. You don't need to be Chad, because the world, it doesn't need more Chads. What the world does need, though, is more men who are whole, more men who are safe, more men who are not afraid of their softness, more men who intentionally build intimacy with their presence and not their status. The world needs more men who have the courage to say, I might not be everybody's type, but I'm worth loving exactly as I am. That kind of man, he doesn't have to be chosen. He actually lives as if he is chosen already, like every day, by his own metric of integrity and alignment, by his own commitments to his depths, and by the quiet truth that he belongs before anyone else said he did. I hope that you believe this for you too.